Welcome today to CTN, KFXB, All Things Recovery, hosted by IRCO, Iowa Recovery Rescue Community Organization. We want to thank you today for tuning in. On this show, we talk about a lot, I interview a lot of different people concerning the subject of recovery and substance use disorders. We find that a lot of people can gather hope. They also can learn from it. Today we've got a great guest here, RaeAnn Kennedy, who has got a lot of experience in the substance use disorders, plus many other areas of the social arena. And I want to welcome you today,
Thank you
RaeAnn.
for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You bet. I'm excited to have her because she knows a lot about the social arena. So I will start out today and ask RaeAnn, what drew you, RaeAnn, to the field of social work and substance use disorders?
Well, my whole entire life, I think, has been aimed towards this. I grew up in an alcoholic family, in a very poor alcoholic family. We didn't have clothes, and we had food and whatever, but alcohol took a lot of the money that should have went towards other things in my family. And long story short, I got married and pregnant in my high school, and I dropped out of high school in 9th grade, and I went and got my GED about 10 years later. But I always wanted to help people that had alcoholism in their family. And when I got to Loris, I went to NICC I took classes here and there, and when I got to Loris, I talked to Dr. Sanito there, who was a psych professor, and I said, I need to get a job where I can work full-time as soon as I get out of school. And he said, major in social work. So then I majored in social work. And I had the opportunity at that time, Mercy in Dyersville was looking for counselor aides for the weekends, and I applied for it, and I was hired for a counselor aide. Now, I worked full-time when I was in school, and I had 3 kids at home, and my husband worked second shift, so I never would have done it without the help of my oldest daughter and my next-door neighbor, who helped with the kids when I was in school at night. But once I started at Mercy in Dyersville, their adolescent center, I knew that that was for me. I knew that substance abuse education, substance abuse counseling was where I wanted to be. And we did lots of things out there. I was a counselor aide for about a year, and then a promotion, I was promoted to a counselor. So I worked with family therapy, I worked with individual therapy, we did group therapy. We took the kids to 12-step meetings where staff had to sit in on the 12-step meetings, which I thought was wonderful. I got so much out of those 12-step meetings, much more than the kids did, I'm sure. But we went from Cascade to Monticello to Macokota to, just everywhere to take the kids to the AA meetings.
Let me back you up just a little bit. Now, you talked about, in our interview, that you were an adult child of an alcoholic.
Right.
You want to explain that a little more, RaeAnn?
I believe in 1978 or something, Janet Warrants, who was a PhD, wrote a book called Adult Children of Alcoholics, where she actually describes the symptoms of being an adult who was raised in an alcoholic home. And I actually jotted a couple of them down. The symptoms are isolation, approval seeking, low self-esteem, fear of abandonment, victim perspective, and fear of authority. And then there were other books written where adult children of alcoholics guess what normal is. They have difficulty following projects to the end. They judge themselves harshly. The fear of abandonment is a big thing with adult children of alcoholics. And they're either super everything, or else they can't do anything, and they're victims. They sometimes become what's called a para-alcoholic, where they take on the characteristics of the addict, but they don't have the actual substance or whatever. But that, taking on characteristics of the alcoholic or the addict could be compulsive shopping or compulsive gambling. It doesn't necessarily have to be a substance.
Right.
So poor coping skills, dysfunctional relationships. So there's a whole realm of information out there that you can study in regards to adult children of alcoholics. And we use this information a lot when we worked with the teens out in Dyersville and let them know that, you know, their substance use had a reason, and you have to dig down into that reason, and you have to really go to it from your heart and be open to what God's willing to give you the information of why you're doing what you're doing and why you're self-destructing. And they actually, the teens that I worked with got more into this than they did into their own substance abuse, because it made sense for them. It kind of explained their life, and that's how I felt when I first read this book. Is like, oh my God, I could have written this book, you know. It was just amazing how it was right on in regards to a lot of the symptoms that I had felt over the years.
That's amazing. And you had said in the interview that this is why you got into social service, that you didn't want other children to have to go through what you went through.
Right.
And I think I commend you for that. But it's neat that when you first got into this, you knew right away, this is what
This was it.
I'm created for.
That's right. This was it.
And a lot of people never get to find that, you know. So it's and RaeAnn had a lot of things that she had to go through. Her husband had an accident,
Right.
and so she was raising a daughter, 6-year-old daughter, by herself. And
Right. He died when I was 22, and then 13 months later, my mom died of cancer. So in 13 months' time, I lost my husband and my mom both to death. And
I can't
at
imagine.
that time, you know, 22, 23 years old, you're really not old enough to cope with something like that. But when you're the mother of a 6-year-old, you have to cope. You have to keep going. You have to keep working. You have to put on a brave face. And you know, the sorrow is between you and God. It's at night when you're in bed and you're praying. But it was hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through in my life, was the death of my husband. And it was just very, very, very hard.
Yeah, it's grief is many times a trigger to people getting into substance use disorders, and of course, naturally, what you went through was just outright.
Right, and it caused
grief.
depression.
Oh, yeah.
I've been depressed for many years. I'm not depressed anymore, thank goodness. I've seen doctors over the years and gone to counseling over the years to try to get rid of the depression that I felt. And you know, I've had a whole life of trauma, which sounds weird, but it is. Basically, my life has been very traumatic. I have friends that tell me I should write a book about my life because I've had so many different experiences. So,
but the good thing is that you've overcome.
Right, I've gained strength from every traumatic experience that I've had.
And then look at the repertoire. Look at what you have to go and help other people with.
Exactly.
And I've known RaeAnn for many, many years, and her husband's family, my family knew. Matter of fact, when RaeAnn lost her husband, my parents went out to his mother and father's farm and actually spent time with them.
Right.
Because my parents lost a son. They knew what it was like to lose a boy, a young son like RaeAnn's husband there. So RaeAnn and I have always had that in common. But you also talked about your first job at Mercy and working with adolescents, and you talked about, you know, you learned at that particular age that they had trauma, that they all had trauma. And I think the thing that I remember you talking about, I said, what did you find? What was the interesting thing that you learned working with those children? Can you remember what?
Well, I think every addict has some sort of traumatic experience that kind of zags them out of their, you know, their highway through life and takes them in a different direction. But in regards to, well, not just at Mercy with the adolescents, but in regards to adults that I've worked with both in probation and at Sassy, almost every client I had some sort of traumatic experience, whether it was physical abuse, sexual abuse, divorce, their parents divorced when they were kids and they just never got over that. You know, that sounds weird because today 50% of marriages end in divorce, so you'd think, oh my God, you know,
right,
how it impacts the kids. But kids are very resilient and they'll come through that at the time, but at a later age, when they're in relationships themselves, they have that fear of abandonment, and they have that codependency issues where they'll do whatever it takes to stay in that relationship, and they'll take on all kinds of, they just don't have boundaries at all.
Wouldn't you say that most people that are into substance use disorder, RaeAnn, that have an issue is really the core issue of the trauma is fear?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And scriptures say that God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind. And it also says that fear is torment. And you know, if you're afraid of something and you keep thinking of that, but you know, I have learned that through Christ I can overcome fear.
Right.
I can. And really, the drug that's prescribed more than any other in America is anxiety medication, and that is based on fear.
Right.
You know,
right.
So the one thing that Jesus said, he said, my peace I give unto you. And he also said, the peace of God, which passes understanding, which even passes our thinking, our brain. You know,
exactly.
So God is a very present help in times of trouble, in times that we have a lot of fear.
And
so.
fear is really the bottom line. With a lot of my clients, I've tried to help them and encourage them to push through that fear. Like, feel the fear and do it anyway is a saying that they have in AA. And I've tried to express that towards my clients and let them know that, you know, everybody has a fear. I have a fear. You know,
We all do.
When I was a probation officer, you know, I own my own house, I own my own vehicle, I was in a good relationship, I have wonderful, healthy children and grandchildren. And my clients think, oh, you got the world, you know, by the tail. But I've told them I fear, every day I have a fear of some kind or another, you know, that nothing's forever in God's world, and we have to go with the flow and try to guide ourselves in the way that He's pulling us, because everything happens for a reason. And that's something that I've always told my clients too, is everything happens for a reason. So if you can figure out the reason why you started using substances and dig back, it was extremely hard for people to dig back into their history, you know, because some of them started using when they were 10 or 12 years old. You know, they would steal beer out of the refrigerator of their dads, or they would use with the older neighbor kids or something like that. But if you can figure out the first time that you started using and when it began to progress and when your tolerance started to raise, then you have an answer. You have one of the answers to what this problem is that's taking over your life. So
if you can really dig that up, then you can analyze it, look at it in the face and go, that's why I do what I do.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It certainly is. And one of the things in our earlier pre-interview you had talked about is how substance use and different illicit drugs are cyclical.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about that, RaeAnn?
Well, most research says that substance abuse in communities it's just cyclical. The problems tend to be like opioids or heroin or downers, and then a year or two later, then the big problem is meth or cocaine or uppers, and then again it'll be opioids, heroin, you know, downers. Fentanyl, exactly. So it just kind of runs in a system. Here in Dubuque, we have every drug imaginable that there is. You know, Dubuque's is basically a small town, you know, mid-sized town, and a lot of people don't realize that we have the substance use that we have, and we have the violence and the issues that a lot of big metropolitan cities have.
Right.
And, you know, kind of a joke, my fiance and I go out to dinner every Saturday night, and there's a certain restaurant that he likes to go to, and I always tell him I'm not going there at night because it's a violent part of town. And he'll laugh at me and say, oh, you're crazy. And I always tell him, I read the intelligence reports when I was a PO, and I know that that's a violent part of town, and I don't want to go there at night. So,
Yeah.
but we have, you know, we have IV users, needles, you know, we have meth, we have heroin, we have fentanyl, we have cocaine, we have crack cocaine, we have it all in Dubuque.
Opioids and
Yep.
kratom and
Yep, bath salts, over-the-counter drugs that people are taking advantage of. People, I had a client that used to drink rubbing alcohol when she couldn't get wine. You know, it was terrible. She was a mess. She was just a mess. And unfortunately, I didn't end up helping her as much as I thought I could. She did okay for a while, and then she relapsed, and then she ended up going to prison. But it's sad stories like that that keep you going when you're in a job like this.
you know, you can't, I don't think when you're dealing with, you know, to me, substance use abuse is really a rescue. It's a
Right.
rescue.
Right.
You're plucking them right out of the fire, the
That's
fires
right.
of addiction. And, you know, there's times that you put a lot of hope in somebody and you think, oh, they're getting it. And then you'll have a big disappointment. But then every now and then you get somebody that'll come along that their progress may be slow, but they keep making it, and they keep making it, and they keep their head in the game, and they just keep moving, and they overcome it.
Right.
You live for one of those people.
Oh, God,
It makes it
yeah.
all worthwhile. If you can save 1 out of 100, I mean, you're just thinking, wow, because that person then can go in the community and help a person. That's, to me, is the apex when it comes to substance use disorders, is not just getting someone to stop it, but getting them to want to make a difference in the whole arena of substance use disorders. So, and occasionally you get those, you know,
Right.
they make great peers and great peer supports, you know, but
When I would go to work in the morning, I would say a little prayer and say, if I could help, Lord, just one person today, then my day is complete. And
true.
I have a man that, well, I've retired since then, so I don't know if he's going to keep writing me, but a man that I had on probation that would write me letters and tell me how much I helped him in his life, and you know, that when he was always afraid of probation officers or the cops, and when he'd come into my office, I would put him at ease and we could talk and he would relax and he felt comfortable, and he'd call me every once in a while when he had a lot of anxiety and fear, and I'd kind of talk him down from it. And the first letter I got from him, was like I won the lottery. It was just so great to hear that from somebody. And he's in
Yes.
prison right now for selling
Yeah.
heroin. And so, you know, I still think he's a success story.
right.
You know, even though he made poor decision after he got off probation, I think he was a success story while he was on probation. He had a job, he wasn't using, he was in a relationship, and he was just a heck of a nice guy, you know. And you wouldn't think that you would call a gangbanger or a drug dealer a nice guy, but you have to look at these people as human beings. You can't look at them as, you know, oh, the file number 23 is a gangbanger, so great, I got a gangbanger today, you know, on my caseload. You can't look at that. You have to look at them as human beings that have hearts and souls.
And you made a good point. They can be very successful and very useful while they're in prison. You know, when somebody decides, like a lot of these folks, when they're incarcerated, or maybe they finally have to go to prison for a while,
Right.
a lot of them turn their lives over to God.
Right,
They
do.
realize their life is unmanageable, that they don't have the power to overcome, and they can be very instrumental while in prison. And I think the gentleman you're talking about, that's what you're talking about.
And prison offers them opportunities. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is taken away because of funding now, but they offer education, they offer
Training.
they offer VOTEC skills, they offer a connection to God. You know, they offer
Yeah.
that. A lot of these men and women haven't walked in a church in years, if they've ever walked in a church, and prison ministries reach out to them and they have a connection with someone. And I think you have to have that connection with that higher power in order to be successful in your substance abuse or any type of addiction.
I just don't know really how someone can do it without spirituality.
Right.
I don't see how, because that is our hope.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you
I
don't,
agree.
you don't have hope that there's something greater than yourself, because obviously yourself couldn't pull it off.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you hope in something that you can hope in, that you feel like will be there for you,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that gives you the impetus, the hope that I can do this. I can move on.
Right.
I can do it. You know,
Right.
one of the things that you said in our interview, you talk like that the children now, they're getting the drugs younger.
Right, they are, yeah.
You know,
10 and 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And the violence, the victims are younger too. Victims and perpetrators of violence is much younger too. I mean, here in Dubuque, you know, 15-year-olds that are stabbing other 14, 15-year-olds and shooting people and whatever. So I don't have an answer to that. I just think that there's just a hopelessness within these people that I was watching 48 Hours on TV last night. It's a cop show, and it was out of Miami, and the detective talked about how they could get this neighborhood to be peaceful because neighbors were shooting neighbors, and kids that grew up together were shooting each other because they were in rival gangs and whatever. And he said they've never seen it before, but these kids have such hopelessness that they believe they're going to be dead by the time they're 25. So they just want to live life to its fullest, and they'll, you know, if the law of the street says shoot somebody in a rival gang, then that's what they're going to do because they expect to die by the age 25 anyway.
Or shoot or be shot.
Right, exactly.
One or the other. Wow. It's I think there's a lot of things that are causing it. I think one is moral failure. I think the other, the one parent families, and even sometimes if they're working, that parent isn't even available.
Right.
So kids run the streets and they get in a lot of trouble. They get into drugs and this and that. And America needs to get back to God.
Oh my
I think
goodness,
that's our
does
biggest
it ever.
problem. Not everybody agree with me, but that's all right. You know,
Yeah.
I don't have to have everybody
I
agree with me, but I think over the years America has really gotten off track, and we need to get back on track.
And substance abuse or addiction has no boundaries. It's, you know, you can be rich, you can be poor, you can be single family, you can be from an intact family. It attacks wherever there's an opening. So
a weakness.
yeah, there's something within that family unit that has caused that dysfunction or that hopelessness that child has or that young adult has to cause them to turn to the streets.
Well, it's a lot of times too, you get parents in situations like what I talked about. The child really doesn't get the attention, you know,
Right.
And is somewhat neglected. And that alone would bring in hopelessness. It's like, how could you not go to school and compare yourself to some of the kids that their parents are there for them and yours aren't, you know? So it's definitely part of the solution is working with children. There's no doubt about that. But RaeAnn, what do you think are some of the keys for success for someone that has substance use disorders? What do you think some of the keys for success are?
Spirituality is the number one thing that in my opinion, it is. You have to have some sort of higher power connection because the loneliness and the hopelessness is there. And if you have a higher power, then you know that there's at least one thing, one person that's on your side.
It's true.
So I think spirituality is key to it. The other thing is you have to have a connection with people. Being an addict is a very lonely life to lead. You know, addicts buy their drugs from other addicts and sell drugs to other addicts, but it's a very lonely life to lead. So I think having a connection with society in some way, whether it's your grandmother or your mother or your
Church.
The church, exactly.
The church would help, a group. That's why a lot of them get a lot out of AA, NA,
Right.
because at least it's a group of people. They don't have to feel alone, and you know, they're most comfortable with their peers.
Right.
And the stigmas, you know, that they deal with. They don't feel good about themselves to want to get together with other people, to want to sometimes seek out family members. Family members can't understand, well, why don't they call? They don't feel good about themselves.
Right. And so many of them have been ostracized by their family already. They've burned their bridges with their family members or their friends. So the family's given up on them, or at least families set that boundary that you can't do this to me anymore. It hurts too much to watch you kill yourself with substance use. And so they've pulled away from their family because the families ostracize them, and their friends have too. And, you know, having an addict for a friend is not much of a friend. You know, addicts hang out together, but they're not friends. So when they go through treatment and they become sober, when they get out of treatment, there's nobody for them to come out to. There's nowhere for them to come to. They're unemployed. They have no family support. They have no community support. They have nothing other than God is there for them. So it's very important to get that community connection hooked into them through the 12-step meetings. I think is the #1 thing that they need to do when they get out of treatment.
They need to have some kind of mentoring going on. They need to have people surrounding them that believe in them, that can encourage them. I think that's really important. But from all that you have done, and RaeAnn's been in a lot of arenas, what do you think you've learned from all of that?
I've learned that people are very strong and resilient, and that there is hope. There's hope for everyone, despite how down and out they are. I just passed a homeless man when I came here today, and I wondered what his story was, you know, why he was walking the streets. He was 2 blocks from the Dubuque Rescue Mission, but he was walking the wrong way, and I wanted to stop and tell him, are you aware that we have a rescue mission that way? But I didn't. I was in a rush to come here, so, and I kind of feel guilty about it now. But I think what I've learned most of all is that people can help people, but you have to have that community. You have to have a community of some kind, even if it's a community of one. You have to have it.
I happen to agree with that. Well, we want to thank you today for tuning in to All Things Recovery, and we'll see you next week. But we thank you. We hope you've learned from this, been blessed by it. Have a great day.